Supervisory Special Agent Darius Cole, Federal Law Enforcement.
Yeah, okay, step out of the car, now.
I can verify that in 10 seconds. My credentials are with me.
You're talking too much. Step out. We'll sort it out outside.
Officer, why are you treating this like a felony stop? You haven't
Stop
verified...
By the end of that week, Officer Evan Mercer was off the street. His badge and weapon were logged into evidence, and his name was tied to a $9.6 million settlement his city couldn't explain away. It didn't start with a chase. It didn't start with gunfire. It started with a traffic stop that never should have happened, and it ended with federal scrutiny, national headlines, and a department forced to open its records. And the reason it exploded so fast was simple. Mercer picked the wrong person to treat like a target, and the entire stop was captured from multiple angles. Quick thing, where are you watching from? Drop your country or state in the comments. And if you watch stories where power gets checked by evidence, oversight, and accountability, hit like and subscribe. Now rewind to the morning that set all of it in motion. Supervisory Special Agent Darius Cole left home early because he had a briefing at the nearby FBI field office. He wasn't running late. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't driving like someone trying to get away with something. He was doing what he did every day, moving through a normal commute with his work already on his mind. Cole worked civil rights. He was the kind of investigator who studied how small abuses of authority turn into patterns when nobody stops them. He also knew something most drivers didn't fully understand until it was too late. A traffic stop is one of the few moments where one stranger can legally control another stranger's body, time, and freedom. If the officer wants to escalate, it can happen fast. If the driver reacts emotionally, it can get framed as resistance. Cole never forgot that. He drove a basic sedan through a corridor that was always busy in the mornings. Gas stations, coffee shops, office buildings, people pulling in and out. It was the kind of stretch where patrol units like to sit because there were always cars and always reasons to pull one. Officer Evan Mercer was posted in that area because he liked stops. Inside the department, people called him proactive. On the street, that translated to initiating first and sorting out justification second. He was confident, loud when he wanted to be, and comfortable pushing people into quick compliance. Mercer also had a paper trail. Complaints tied to minority drivers, claims that he escalated too quickly, claims he used vague suspicion language when there was no clear violation. None of it had ended his career, because complaints don't end careers unless the department decides they matter. For Mercer, they kept getting filed, minimized, and moved past. That morning, Mercer saw Cole's car and decided it looked suspicious. Not because it matched a real description from dispatch. Not because it was speeding or swerving. Not because it ran a light or failed to signal. He decided based on a feeling and the kind of bias that turns a routine drive into an excuse. He pulled out and followed long enough to look for a reason. Cole stayed steady. No sudden movements, no erratic lane changes, no traffic errors to point to later. Mercer activated his lights anyway. Cole responded exactly the way trained people do when they want everyone to go home safely. He signaled. He slowed down. He pulled over in a spot that was visible and wide enough to reduce danger from passing traffic. He kept his hands where they could be seen and waited. Mercer approached the driver's side with a posture that already signaled this wasn't going to be calm. He didn't treat it like a routine stop where the officer explains the reason and the driver provides documents. He treated it like a confrontation where the driver needed to be controlled immediately. Cole stayed composed. He informed Mercer he was federal law enforcement and was on duty. He stated his credentials were in his wallet. He also made it clear he wasn't going to start reaching around without clear instruction, because unclear commands are how stops get twisted into excuses. Mercer didn't take the obvious step, verify the credentials. He didn't ask for a supervisor. He didn't slow down and create a safe, clear process. Instead, he kept the interaction in a gray zone, pushing rapid commands without clear guidance, making it easy to claim non-compliance no matter what Cole did. Cole tried to make it simple. He repeated that he could prove his identity and position. He identified where his wallet was and indicated he would retrieve it only if Mercer directed him clearly. Cole kept his tone steady and his movements controlled. Mercer treated that calmness like a challenge. He acted like the mention of credentials made the driver more suspicious instead of less. He leaned into the idea that the driver was lying before he even looked. This is the part that mattered later, because the record didn't just show a disagreement. It showed an officer refusing the basic verification step that would have ended the stop in 30 seconds. And the entire thing was being documented. Mercer's dash cam recorded from the moment the lights came on. His body cam captured his approach, his tone, and how quickly he escalated. Across the street, a bystander started recording because Mercer's posture and intensity looked out of place for a stop that had no obvious cause. Another bystander near the gas station recorded from a different angle, catching the space between them, and how little Cole did to provoke anything. Cole's phone added another layer Mercer didn't know about. Cole had an emergency feature enabled that shared his location and connected him to someone who could act fast if something went wrong. During the stop, that feature activated and reached a colleague at the field office, SSA Maya Rios. Rios recognized what it meant. Cole didn't trigger that kind of alert for minor inconvenience. She moved immediately, contacting other personnel and tracking the location. Back at the curb, Mercer ordered Cole out of the car. Cole complied carefully, moving slowly and keeping his hands visible. Mercer closed distance like he expected the situation to turn physical, even though Cole's behavior stayed controlled and cooperative. Cole again stated he was a federal agent and that his credentials were in his wallet. He gave Mercer the cleanest path out. Verify, confirm, end the stop. Mercer refused the path out. Instead, Mercer escalated to restraints. Cole did not resist. He didn't pull away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't give Mercer anything that could be framed as a threat. He stayed steady because he understood what this was becoming. Not a roadside argument, but an evidence event. Something that would be reviewed frame by people who weren't emotionally invested in Mercer's pride. And when the handcuffs went on, the outcome was already set in motion. Not because Cole was powerful, but because the stop had been recorded from too many angles for anyone to rewrite later. Mercer kept Cole at the curb in handcuffs and continued the stop like it was still a normal investigation. Cole stayed still and kept his hands where Mercer could see them. He again informed Mercer he was a federal agent and said his credentials were in his wallet. He also said he would not reach for anything without clear instruction. Mercer did not verify the wallet. He kept asking questions that had nothing to do with traffic. Where Cole was going, why he was in the area, what he was doing that morning. Cole answered only basic information and repeated that verification would end the stop. Cole's phone also triggered an emergency feature tied to location and an alert. That alert reached a colleague at the nearby FBI field office, SSA Maya Rios. She recognized the location, tried contacting Cole, and immediately notified others in the office. She also contacted local supervisors through official channels while personnel moved toward the scene. A short time later, FBI personnel arrived close enough to be visible near the stop. Their presence changed the scene fast. Mercer looked around, started speaking more carefully, and shifted his posture, but the cuffs were still on. Only then did Mercer finally check Cole's wallet. Mercer opened it and saw the federal credentials. The stop changed instantly. Mercer removed the cuffs and tried to explain the situation as a misunderstanding. But the recordings already showed the timeline. No clear traffic violation, no immediate verification, and an escalation to restraints before checking identification. Cole did not argue on the roadside. He focused on documentation. He identified himself again, noted Mercer's name and badge number, and requested that a supervisor respond and that all video be preserved. Rios and the FBI personnel stayed on scene long enough to confirm Cole's identity and confirm what had already been captured on camera. Bystanders continued recording. By that afternoon, the videos were already leaving the neighborhood. One bystander posted a short clip showing Cole in cuffs on the roadside. Another posted a longer angle that included Mercer's commands, and the moment Mercer finally checked the wallet. People didn't need context to see the problem. No visible threat, no obvious traffic reason, and an officer escalating anyway. Cole got to the field office and went straight into documentation mode. He reported the incident through internal channels, logged the time, location, and responding unit information, and requested immediate preservation of all video and radio traffic. That included Mercer's dashcam footage, Mercer's bodycam footage, dispatch audio and CAD entries, any responding supervisor bodycam footage. Rios also documented what she received on her end, the alert, the time she saw it, the calls she made, and who she notified. That mattered later because it created an independent timeline that didn't rely on Mercer's explanation. The local department reacted fast, but not in a way that fixed anything. They started with damage control. A supervisor contacted the field office and used neutral language, calling it a misunderstanding and saying it would be handled internally. Within the department, Mercer was told to write a detailed statement. He claimed the car looked suspicious and implied he believed it might be connected to an unspecified description. He also wrote that the driver's behavior raised concern, even though the footage showed controlled compliance. That's where the problem got worse for Mercer, because the video didn't match his wording. The department couldn't keep it quiet because the clips were already spreading and reporters started calling within 24 hours. Then, the FBI made it formal. Cole's unit requested the department preserve evidence and provide all related materials. They also requested the stop data tied to Mercer's history, prior complaints, stop reports, use of force reports, and any internal review notes. This wasn't a public threat. It was a standard step when a stop may involve a civil rights violation. The city's legal office also got involved quickly. They asked for the same footage and reports, because once something is public and documented, the settlement risk becomes obvious. By the end of the week, Mercer was pulled off the street and placed on administrative leave. He was ordered to surrender his badge and weapon pending investigation. That decision wasn't framed as guilt, it was framed as policy. But it happened fast because the department knew the footage would not support him. At the same time, the story widened beyond Mercer. Internal Affairs opened a review into the stop itself, and separate reviewers started pulling Mercer's prior history. Complaints that had been resolved and unfounded were reopened and reread next to the new footage. Patterns started showing up in simple numbers: who he stopped, how often stops escalated, and how often suspicion showed up without clear violations. Once Mercer was placed on leave, the department tried to narrow the issue to one bad stop. The problem was the records didn't stay narrow. Internal Affairs pulled the full stop packet and immediately hit gaps. The report language was broad, but the video was specific. Mercer wrote "suspicious vehicle" and referenced a general description, but dispatch logs didn't show a matching bulletin tied to Cole's car. His timeline also didn't line up cleanly with the footage, especially around when he decided to cuff Cole versus when he verified identity. As the department reviewed Mercer's history, they stopped treating prior complaints like isolated incidents. They pulled his traffic stops from the last few years and compared them to other officers in the same area and shift. The department's data unit and internal affairs started looking at basics: who he stopped, how often stops turned into searches, how often suspicion was used in reports, and how often complaints came from minority drivers. The review wasn't about one clip. It was about whether the clip matched a pattern. It did. Some older complaints didn't include body cam video because of missing uploads or incomplete retention. Others had footage, but had been cleared with minimal review. That became a problem on its own because it showed the department had the tools to catch this earlier and didn't use them. Public pressure built in stages. First, it was social media sharing the videos. Then local reporters found the incident report and asked why there was no clear legal basis described. Then national outlets started calling because the driver was an FBI civil rights supervisor. After that, elected officials asked for briefings, not because they wanted details, but because they needed to know whether this was going to become a federal case. The department issued a short statement saying they were reviewing the incident. They avoided specifics. They also avoided naming Mercer at first. That didn't last because the bystander videos included clear visuals of his uniform and badge number. Mercer's union stepped in quickly. They requested representation for him, demanded access to the evidence, and began pushing a familiar defense: uncertainty, officer safety, split-second decisions. That defense didn't fit well here because the timeline was slow, the driver was calm, and verification was available early. Cole's side did not treat it as an internal discipline issue. He treated it as a civil rights violation. He retained counsel with experience in police misconduct cases and filed notice steps that put the city on a clock. The requests were precise: preserve all video, release dispatch audio, produce Mercer's stop history, produce complaint files, and identify supervisors involved in earlier reviews of Mercer's conduct. That's when the city's legal office shifted from PR to risk. They reviewed the video themselves. They reviewed Mercer's report language. They reviewed the lack of a clear traffic basis. They reviewed the bystander footage showing the same events from angles the department couldn't control. They also reviewed what made this uniquely dangerous for them. Cole's role in civil rights work meant he would not mishandle procedure, and his documentation would be airtight. Within weeks, the city was in a position it didn't want. Fighting the lawsuit would force discovery. Discovery would force the release of stop data, complaints, training records, and audit practices. That's how one stop turns into a department-wide exposure. The federal review followed that same logic. Because Cole worked civil rights, the incident didn't stay at the level of a local internal investigation. Requests were made for broader data on biased traffic stops. The department faced questions about how it audited body cams, how it handled complaints, and why patterns weren't caught earlier. Those questions were not abstract. They were tied to numbers and files. Inside the department, Mercer's case moved toward termination. Supervisors documented policy issues, lack of clear probable cause or reasonable suspicion, failure to de-escalate, and improper restraint decisions. The video made it hard to argue it was a misunderstanding. The issue was sequence and choices, captured clearly. Cole's attorney filed the civil rights lawsuit with the videos, dispatch logs, and Mercer's report lined up against the timeline. The city's legal team reviewed it and realized fighting would force discovery. Mercer's stop history, complaint files, body cam audits, and who signed off on past investigations. The risk wasn't just losing the case. The risk was exposing a pattern. Internal Affairs finished its review, and the department fired Mercer. His certification was revoked, blocking him from being rehired as an officer elsewhere. The city settled for $9.6 million rather than go to trial. After that, the department was forced into reforms under outside pressure, stricter body cam auditing, stronger complaint oversight, and monitoring that required real reporting instead of quiet paperwork. Cole didn't do a media tour. He stayed focused on the point. The stop had no legal basis, escalation happened before verification, and the only reason it became real to the system was because it was recorded and documented. So here's the question. If you were in that situation, would you have stayed controlled and procedural like Cole did? Or would you have reacted and risked giving the officer something to use against you? Comment where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories where accountability catches up.
Put the phone away. Stop recording right now.
No, I'm on my property. I've shown you my ID and my mail.
You're interfering with an investigation. That's a lawful order.
What law says I can't record on my own driveway?
Keep refusing and I can arrest you for obstruction.
You're escalating because I'm recording, not because you can't
Give me the
verify
phone.
who I am.
A patrol officer stepped into a front yard, pointed at a woman holding a phone, and moved his hand to his handcuffs. The woman stood next to two trash bins on her own driveway. The officer told her to stop recording. She didn't. He said she was lying about living there. She showed proof anyway. That woman was federal judge Elaine Carter, and within hours, this video was everywhere. Tell me where you're watching from, country or state. And if you like stories where recordings lead to real accountability, like and subscribe. Because this case ended with an FBI civil rights investigation and federal charges. Now, rewind to how it started. It was a quiet Tuesday morning on a suburban street. Elaine Carter stepped outside to set out the trash bins and straighten a few things near the porch. She wasn't dressed for work. She wasn't meeting anyone. She was doing a normal routine. An anonymous, suspicious person call came into the local police. No name, no contact information. Just a report that someone didn't look like they belonged near a house on the street. Officer Brandon Hale was dispatched. He pulled up, got out, and walked straight toward Elaine without a normal greeting. He immediately demanded identification and asked why she was at the house. Elaine stayed calm and showed her driver's license. Hale looked at it and kept questioning her, like the ID didn't settle anything. He asked for more proof and kept his tone aggressive. Elaine tried to end it quickly, and she showed mail addressed to her at that exact address. She pointed toward the front door and her porch, making it clear she was at her own home. Hale still didn't accept it. He kept pressing the same point. He didn't believe her. Elaine raised her phone and started recording the interaction. Hale immediately focused on the phone. He ordered her to stop recording. He told her to put it away. He treated the recording like a problem he needed to shut down. Elaine kept the phone up and kept her voice controlled. She didn't move toward him. She didn't get loud. She kept repeating the same basic facts. She lived there, she had ID, she had mail, and she was on her property. Hale escalated. He accused her of lying. He questioned how she had the mail. He spoke like he was trying to catch her in a contradiction instead of verifying the call and leaving. Neighbors started noticing. Janine Alvarez, an older neighbor, stepped outside and recognized Elaine. She walked closer and tried to confirm to the officer that Elaine lived there. She said she had known her as a neighbor for years. Hale dismissed the neighbor and warned her to back up. He treated her as interference. The neighbor stayed nearby and started recording too. Across the street, Ethan Park's doorbell camera captured the interaction from a second angle, including audio. Elaine tried to give Hale an easy way to verify without drama. She suggested he run her name through dispatch and confirm the address. She offered to stand there while he did it. She didn't refuse to identify. She didn't refuse to cooperate. She kept offering proof. Hale didn't de-escalate. He raised the pressure again, this time shifting to threats. He said her recording was causing a problem. He said her behavior could be treated as obstruction. He repeated the order to stop filming. Elaine kept recording. That's when Hale stepped closer, turned his body sideways like he was preparing to control her movement, and reached towards his cuffs. The neighbors reacted immediately. More phones came out. People started calling out that she lived there. The street went from quiet routine to a full public scene in under 2 minutes. Elaine didn't run. She didn't step back into the house. She stayed where she was, holding her phone steady, with her ID and mail already shown. And the situation moved into the moment that later triggered the national scandal, because Hale was now treating a front yard ID check like an arrest situation. Hale took another step in and told Elaine to put the phone away. She didn't. He then told her she was interfering with an investigation. Elaine didn't argue, and she stayed in place and kept recording. Hale said he was giving her a lawful order. Elaine asked what law required her to stop recording on her own property. Hale didn't answer that. He repeated the order and said if she kept refusing, he could arrest her. This is where the situation changed from a bad stop to a dangerous one, because Hale stopped talking about verifying who she was and started talking about charges. Elaine held her ID up again and showed the mail again. Hale acted like he hadn't seen it. He kept circling back to the same claim. She didn't live there. Janine Alvarez, the neighbor, spoke up again and confirmed Elaine had lived there for years. Hale told her to step back and stop involving herself. Janine didn't move far, but she kept recording. Other neighbors were now visible on porches and sidewalks. Elaine told Hale he could contact dispatch and confirm her address. Hale didn't take the offer. Instead, he moved closer and told her she was being detained. Elaine didn't resist. She didn't pull away. She didn't swing the phone around. She kept it up and angled it so it captured his face and his hands. Hale then reached for Elaine's phone. Elaine pulled the phone slightly back, not in a dramatic way, just enough to keep him from taking it. Hale immediately treated that as resisting. He raised his voice and told her to stop fighting. That's when he tried to grab her wrist. Elaine kept her hands visible and kept repeating that she was not resisting and that she was recording. Hale ignored that and started turning his body like he was going to put her in cuffs right there beside the bins. This is the exact moment that later played on news channels all day. A patrol officer attempting to arrest a woman in her own yard after she showed ID and proof of residency. Backup arrived right then. 2 more officers pulled up. One of them approached fast, saw the porch, saw the bins, saw Elaine's phone up, and saw Hale's posture. He immediately stepped between them and told Hale to pause. Hale didn't pause. He kept talking over the other officer and insisted Elaine was obstructing. The second responding officer asked Elaine calmly for her name. She gave it. The officer asked for her ID again. She handed it over without issue. Hale kept insisting the ID didn't prove anything, and that she could be using a fake address. He said the neighbor was biased and didn't count. He said Elaine's recording was interfering. The responding officer ignored Hale's commentary and did what Hale should have done at minute 1. He called it in and asked dispatch to confirm the address tied to the license. While that check was happening, Hale tried one more move. He told Elaine she needed to stop filming the other officers too. He said she was creating a disturbance. He said her behavior was suspicious. Elaine didn't stop recording. Now Hale was stuck in front of an audience. Multiple neighbors. At least one doorbell camera. Elaine's phone. And 2 officers who could see the situation didn't match Hale's story. Dispatch came back and confirmed the license and address matched the house. That should have ended it instantly. Instead, Hale tried to save it. He said the confirmation didn't matter because the original call said the person looked suspicious. He said Elaine's attitude made him think she was hiding something. He started trying to turn it into a different justification. One of the responding officers told Hale to step back. Hale didn't like being corrected. He said he was doing his job. He said people lie. He said the neighborhood had break-ins. He said he had to treat every situation like a threat. Then he said the line that made this impossible to frame as a simple misunderstanding. He stated in front of everyone that she didn't match the type of person who usually lived in that neighborhood. He didn't say it as a question. He said it as an explanation. The other officers went quiet for a second. The neighbors reacted immediately. You could hear people on the videos calling out that she lived there and that he had no reason to do this. Elaine didn't yell. She didn't insult him. She looked straight at him and told him he had her proof. He had dispatch confirmation and he could leave. Hale still tried to claim she had obstructed him earlier by pulling her phone away when he reached for it. He said he could still arrest her for that. The senior responding officer shut that down in real time. He told Hale to disengage and go back to his car. Hale stood there, angry, staring at Elaine like he wanted the last word. Elaine kept recording until he turned away. Before the officers left, Elaine asked for Hale's name and badge number. Hale didn't want to provide it directly, but the other officer gave it to her. Once the cars pulled off, the street was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. Neighbors stayed outside. Janine walked over and checked on Elaine. Ethan across the street saved his doorbell footage immediately. Elaine went back inside and did not treat it like a normal complaint. She requested body camera video, dispatch logs, and the incident report. She also contacted people who knew exactly how these situations get rewritten on paper. And within a day, the video hit online. Not a clipped version, not a rumor. Clear footage showing an officer escalating after proof was provided, demanding a resident stop recording, attempting to seize a phone, and threatening arrest for obstruction. That's when reporters started asking one question. How many times had this officer done something like this, but without a camera and without a federal judge standing there? The video spread the same day. Elaine Carter's phone angle showed Officer Brandon Hale escalating after she provided ID and proof of residency. Ethan Park's doorbell camera across the street backed up the timeline and captured the tone and threats. Neighbors had short clips too. It wasn't one person's version. It was multiple angles showing the same thing. The police department's first response was a short public statement that framed it as a standard response to an anonymous suspicious person call. They said it was resolved on scene. They didn't address the attempted phone grab, the detention threat, or the obstruction language. Hale then filed his written report, and it didn't match what people watched on video. His report described Elaine as uncooperative and disruptive, and it leaned hard on the idea that recording interfered with police work. He also described neighbors as creating pressure and crowding the scene. The report read like it was built to justify an arrest that never happened, not to document what actually occurred. Elaine didn't go online to argue. She treated it like a legal and accountability problem. Her team sent formal requests for everything connected to the call: dispatch notes, CAD logs, radio traffic, body cam footage, and the full incident report chain. They also sent preservation notices so nothing could be deleted or lost. That's when Sergeant John Dwyer entered the picture. Dwyer contacted Elaine's side in a way that sounded like, "Let's calm this down," but it wasn't an apology and it wasn't a correction. He pushed the idea that Hale acted appropriately and hinted that continuing to release footage would create problems. He also started managing the internal response, reviewing reports, tightening language, and trying to keep the story contained. It didn't work because the public already had the clean version of events. Local news picked it up first, the national outlets ran it for one reason. The person being treated like she didn't belong at her own home was a federal judge. That detail made the story explode, but it also created a second wave of attention that mattered more. People started sharing prior experiences with the same officer and the same department. Residents posted about earlier complaints involving Hale, unnecessary detentions, aggressive escalation during low-risk calls, and repeated use of obstruction when people didn't comply fast enough or questioned him. Several said they filed complaints that went nowhere. Some said they were discouraged from filing at all. Elaine's lawyers pushed for Hale's complaint history and internal affairs outcomes. The city delayed, citing process and privacy. They offered partial records. They tried to slow it down. Elaine's team didn't negotiate through press statements. They filed formal actions to compel records and preserve evidence, and they made it clear they were prepared to take it federal. The federal side got involved quickly because the video showed a clear pattern: escalation after proof, demand to stop recording, and an attempted arrest theory built around obstruction. The FBI Civil Rights Unit opened an investigation and requested not only the footage from this incident, but the department's handling of similar encounters. The FBI focused on 3 areas. 1, patterns, tied to Hale. They found multiple prior complaints with similar themes. A lot were closed as not sustained or unfounded without strong explanation. The paperwork repeatedly framed citizens as disorderly or interfering. 2, supervision tied to Dwyer's name appeared again and again as the reviewing supervisor. Complaints involving Hale consistently ended with minimal consequences, even when the conduct described was serious. 3, report consistency that looked manufactured across unrelated incidents. Reports used similar phrasing and structure, as if they were written from a common script. The FBI treated that as a red flag for coordinated narratives rather than independent documentation. Then the investigation moved from pattern to proof. Investigators pulled internal communications and supplemental report drafts. They found indications that Dwyer had advised Hale on how to describe encounters and how to frame recording as interference. They also found signs that Dwyer tried to influence how responding officers documented the Elaine Carter call, pushing consistency with Hale's version instead of accuracy. The Bodycam situation made it worse. Hale's Bodycam either started late or didn't capture critical early moments, depending on which internal explanation the department gave that week. The shifting explanations added another problem: evidence handling. At that point, it wasn't just a public scandal. It became a federal case about rights violations and falsified or manipulated official records. Within weeks, federal charges were filed against Officer Brandon Hale and Sergeant John Dwyer. Hale faced charges tied to civil rights violations connected to the attempted unlawful detention arrest behavior. Dwyer faced charges tied to obstructive conduct and false statements or report manipulation related to the cover-up efforts. The exact charging language differed by count, but the core was clear. The incident wasn't being treated as a mistake. It was being treated as misconduct with a paper trail. Pressure hit the department from every direction. City council meetings turned into hearings. Community groups demanded external oversight. Reporters requested records daily. The mayor's office started distancing itself. Chief Thomas Keegan tried to hold position by announcing an internal review and promising cooperation. It didn't save him. The FBI investigation made it clear the issue wasn't one officer. The issue was how complaints were handled and how reports were shaped. Keegan resigned when it became obvious leadership couldn't credibly claim ignorance. Then came the lawsuit. The city wanted a fast settlement. They offered money early with terms that would keep details quiet and limit admissions. Elaine refused. She didn't reject the settlement because she didn't want compensation. She rejected it because it would end the story without fixing what allowed it. Her position was simple. A check doesn't change policy, doesn't change training, doesn't change supervision, and doesn't stop the next person from being treated the same way. Her legal team pushed the case forward and tied resolution to reforms. The city fought that at first because policy changes are expensive and politically messy. But the federal charges, the evidence of a pattern, and the public pressure changed the math. The final settlement got expensive, not just because of money, but because it included a reform package that the city couldn't pretend was optional. Elaine also pushed for the department to acknowledge what happened without hiding behind vague language. The city resisted formal admissions, but the combination of federal charges, evidence, and the settlement structure forced public accountability in a way the first statement tried to avoid. Long-term, the case became a reference point in that region. Officers knew recording wasn't going away. Supervisors knew report games could turn into federal investigations. And residents had proof that documentation and persistence could move a system that usually stays locked in place. Elaine went back to her life, but the neighborhood didn't forget what they saw. A person at her own home treated like she didn't belong, until multiple cameras and multiple witnesses made denial impossible. So here's the question for you. If you were in your own yard with your ID, your mail, and neighbors vouching, and an officer still escalated, what would you do next? Stay silent, comply and hope, or record and push it through the system? Drop your answer in the comments and share this with someone who thinks it can't happen to me. And if you want more stories like this, realistic, modern, and focused on accountability, make sure you subscribe.
You need to leave right now.
Officer, what do we do?
I got a disturbance call. You're done here.
Disturbance how?
Stand up and leave or you're getting arrested for trespassing.
Trespassing requires the owner to ask us to leave.
Did the owner say that?
Officer Brandon Klein walked up to the booth and told the family they were leaving immediately. He didn't ask questions first. He didn't speak to the server. He didn't check with the owner. He went straight to them like the decision was already made. The dad, Darnell Carter, kept both hands on the table and asked what they had done. The officer refused to explain and said there had been a disturbance call. Then he jumped to a threat. If they didn't get up right now, he would arrest them for trespassing. The mom, Keisha Carter, stayed seated and asked what disturbance meant because they were eating lunch and their kids were quiet. Klein didn't answer that either. He repeated that they were being told to leave, and he said he didn't need to explain more than that. Their daughter, Ava, 8 years old, stopped chewing and stared at the officer's chest camera, like she didn't understand why it was pointed at her family. Their son, Miles, 5, went from bouncing his legs to going still, the way little kids do when they sense something is wrong but can't name it. The whole thing was happening in the middle of a lunch crowd, and Klein's body camera was recording every second. Now, real quick, where are you watching from? Drop your country or state in the comments. And if you watch stories where people stay calm, the camera stays on and the truth beats the report, hit like and subscribe. All right. Here's who these people were before the officer turned their lunch into a problem. Darnell Carter was 36, a maintenance supervisor who lived by routines because routines kept his family steady. He wasn't the type to argue for sport. He was the type who asked simple questions and expected simple answers. Keisha Carter was 34, worked in healthcare admin, and she had the kind of awareness that came from seeing how quickly normal could flip when someone with authority decided it would. She wasn't loud, but she didn't fold fast either. Ava was observant and old enough to remember moments like this. Miles was young enough to be confused, but not too young to feel tension. They had stopped at Wallace's Diner, a local place that had been open for decades. It was not fancy. Booths, old photos on the walls, a steady flow of regulars. The kind of place where people watched who came in, even if they pretended they didn't. They had been seated for a short time. They ordered, they were eating, there was no scene. Their server, Rosa Medina, had checked on them like she checked on everyone. No warning, no complaint, no request to calm down because there was nothing to calm down. Then a patrol car pulled up outside. At first, nobody at the table thought it mattered. Police showed up places for all kinds of reasons. But Klein came in with a straight line to their booth. Keisha noticed it first because his approach wasn't cautious or curious. It was targeted. He didn't scan the room like he was looking for the source of a problem. He walked like he already had the answer and just needed compliance. He stopped at their booth and told them they had to leave. Darnell asked what rule they broke. Klein said there was a disturbance call and claimed the business wanted them gone. He kept his words vague, like vagueness was the point. When Darnell asked what the call said they did, Klein treated the question like it was an argument. That's the power move. Label first, details never, pressure immediately. Keisha asked who from the diner said they weren't welcome. She asked if the owner made that request. She kept her voice controlled because she knew tone gets rewritten later. Klein didn't answer with a name. He escalated with consequences instead. He said if they didn't stand up and leave right now, he would arrest them for trespassing. Ava's shoulders went tight. Miles looked down at his plate and stopped moving. Rosa, the server, slowed down near the table, not sure if she should step in or stay out of it. And Klein raised his voice just enough so the surrounding tables would hear the word trespass. That was the second move. Make the threat public so the family feels pressure from the room, not just from him. Some people looked away. Some stared. A few started watching closely, because even they could tell something didn't match the moment. The family wasn't yelling. Nobody was arguing. Nobody was standing. It was just an officer hovering over a booth, forcing a family out with no clear reason. And then the one person Klein didn't control stepped into the situation. Hank Wallace, the owner, had been on the floor. He had seen the whole approach. He started walking over with his jaw set, not rushing, but not hesitating either. Klein noticed him coming, and that's where this incident stopped being about a family being intimidated at a booth and started becoming a problem that the officer couldn't rewrite later because the owner was about to contradict him on camera. Hank Wallace reached the booth and stopped close enough that Officer Brandon Klein had to acknowledge him. Hank was the owner, mid-50s, not a man who liked drama in his dining room. but also not a man who lets someone use his business as a weapon. He looked at the Carters first, Darnell, Keisha, Ava, and Miles, then looked at Klein. Klein kept talking like Hank wasn't there yet. He kept repeating that there had been a disturbance call and that the family had to leave. Hank cut through it. He told Klein there was no disturbance. He said nobody on staff reported anything. He said the family was welcome and they could finish their meal. That was the moment the officer's whole management wants you out claim started falling apart in front of witnesses on body camera. Klein didn't take the exit. He didn't say he might have the wrong table. He didn't lower his voice and step back. He shifted his posture and treated Hank like the problem now. He pushed the same angle again, just in a different way. He implied Hank didn't understand what he was dealing with, and he implied the officer had authority to decide who stayed. Hank didn't match the energy. He stayed flat and direct. He repeated that the Carters had not caused a disturbance, and they were not being trespassed. Darnell stayed seated. He kept his hands visible and his voice level. He said they were willing to cooperate, but he wanted one clear answer. What exactly were they accused of doing? Klein still didn't give a specific behavior. No yelling, no threats, no refusal to pay, no harassment. Nothing you could point to. Just the word disturbance, floating in the air like it was supposed to be enough. Keisha watched the officer's face while he talked. She could tell he wasn't trying to resolve anything. He was trying to force compliance without explanation, because explanation creates accountability. Ava kept staring at the body camera. Miles looked at his parents like he was waiting for permission to breathe normally again. Rosa, the server, stopped near the end of the booth with a coffee pot in her hand that she didn't pour. She wasn't trying to get involved, but she was close enough to hear everything and remember it later. Klein's tone changed again. He stopped acting like he was simply responding to a call and started acting like he was being challenged. That's when he leaned into intimidation. He implied that if Hank didn't handle his customers, it could become an issue for the business. He didn't say it like a threat on paper. He said it like a reminder, like police can make a place uncomfortable whenever they want. He referenced permits, inspections, and how things get looked at when businesses don't cooperate. It was the kind of implied retaliation that never gets written down, because the point is to scare you into compliance without leaving evidence. Except the evidence was already recording. And this is where body cameras matter, not because they record just the words, but because they capture the situation the words are trying to manipulate. A calm family seated with food, a diner full of witnesses, an owner directly contradicting the officer, a threat being floated without reason. Hank didn't back off. He told Klein again that the Carters were welcome and he was not asking them to leave. Klein then tried a different tactic. He redirected back towards Darnell and Keisha and treated it like it was now their choice to make it easy or make it hard. He framed it like leaving would be a favor to everyone and staying would be them choosing trouble. Darnell didn't take the bait. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult the officer. He did the one thing that makes a shaky authority move harder to defend later. He asked for clarity and process. He asked if the owner was requesting a trespass. He asked if there was a specific law being enforced. He asked if Klein could state on camera what the family had done to justify removal. Klein didn't want to answer those questions because answering would lock him into facts. Instead, he tried to reset the scene again. He said he had reasonable grounds, and that was enough. Hank stepped closer, not threatening, just present. He told Klein that if there was a complaint, it didn't come from him or his staff. He told him he was not trespassing the family. He told him the family was eating lunch and bothering nobody. Klein looked around the dining room like he was checking who was watching, because now it wasn't just the Carters challenging him. It was the owner, the staff, and half the room quietly listening. And Klein realized something. He could still arrest them, but it would be messy. It would be recorded. It would have witnesses. And he would have to explain why he arrested a calm father in front of his kids when the business owner said they were welcome. So he did what officers do when they can't win the moment cleanly. He backed off just enough to keep control of the narrative later. He told them they were being warned and that next time it would go differently. He said something about remembering this place. He implied he'd be back. Then he turned it into a performance of restraint, like he was the one choosing peace. But the room had already seen what happened, and the body camera had already captured the gap between his authority and his explanation. Darnell stayed calm until the officer started stepping away. Then he said one final thing, controlled and clear, meant for the camera as much as for the officer. He said he wanted the officer's name and badge number documented, because this was not a lawful removal, and they would be filing a complaint. Klein didn't respond like a professional being held accountable. He responded like someone who hated being documented. He left the booth area, but not the tension. The diner stayed quiet for a few seconds after he walked out. Hank looked at the family and told them they could stay and finish their meal. Rosa finally put the coffee pot down and asked if they needed anything. Keisha nodded, but her hands were shaking slightly now that the pressure was moving away. Ava asked her mom, quietly, what they did wrong. And Keisha had to answer the hardest part. They didn't. After Officer Brandon Klein left, the Carters stayed long enough to calm the kids and finish what they could. But the lunch was done the second he walked up. Darnell paid, Keisha gathered the kids, and they left with that tight, controlled silence families get when they're trying not to scare their children more than they already are. In the car, Keisha did the first practical thing. She wrote down everything she could remember while it was fresh. Time, location, what Klein said, and what Hank Wallace said in front of everyone. Darnell did the next thing. He called the diner back and asked Hank for the correct spelling of his name and confirmation that the family was never asked to leave by management. Hank didn't hesitate. He told Darnell he'd back them up. He also told Rosa, the server, to write her own note about what she saw, including the time the officer entered and how long he stayed near the booth. Hank knew how these situations usually went. If the officer wrote the story first, people treated it as fact. That's exactly what happened. Within days, Klein submitted a written report that described the call like it had been real trouble. He claimed there had been a disturbance that involved the family. He wrote it in a way that made his actions sound reasonable and necessary. He framed Darnell's questions as refusal and implied the family had created tension in the diner. But the key detail wasn't what he said. It was what he couldn't support. Because the report didn't match what witnesses saw, and it didn't match what the business owner said on camera. Darnell and Keisha filed a complaint with the department and requested the body camera footage. They also filed a separate complaint about the trespass threat and the fact that Klein claimed management wanted them out when the owner said the opposite. And while they did that, Hank handled it on his end too. He called the non-emergency line and asked how a disturbance call at his diner turned into an officer trying to remove a family that the owner never asked to remove. He made it clear he wanted the incident documented from the business side. That pressure mattered. It meant the department couldn't dismiss it as a single civilian complaint. When the body cam footage finally got pulled, it didn't kind of support Klein's version. It undercut it completely. The video showed a family sitting and eating. It showed no yelling, no threats, no disruption. It showed Klein refusing to explain what they supposedly did, then escalating directly to trespass threats. It showed Hank Wallace walking up and clearly stating there was no disturbance and the family was welcome. It showed Klein shifting into intimidation when his management wants you out claim got challenged. That video created a problem the department couldn't solve with a quiet denial. Because once the footage existed, it wasn't just about what happened. It was about why Klein wrote something different after. The complaints moved faster. Internal affairs got involved earlier than usual, and not because the Carters were famous or connected, but because the evidence was clean. The timeline was clear. The contradictions were clear. Then it spread. Not as a viral fantasy story, but in the realistic way these things spread. Hank told a few regulars. Rosa told her cousin. Someone who had been in the diner that day told someone else. A local community page mentioned it. People started asking a simple question. Why was a quiet family treated like a threat? Within a week or two, the city started getting calls. The diner started getting messages. Some were supportive, some were hostile. And that's when Hank realized the officer hadn't just tried to push out the Carters. He'd also tried to teach the diner owner a lesson for refusing. But Hank didn't fold. He kept saying the same thing to anyone who asked. The family didn't do anything, and the officer was wrong. And the more people heard that, the more the focus shifted from a misunderstanding to something heavier. An officer using vague disturbance language to control a situation that didn't need control, then trying to rewrite it afterward. That's where the case stopped being private. Once Internal Affairs had the body cam and the written report side by side, the issue stopped being a complaint about tone. It became an integrity case. Lieutenant Priya Desai opened a formal investigation and did what strong investigators do first. She checked whether this was a one-time bad call or a repeat method. She pulled Klein's recent reports that used the same keywords: disturbance, non-compliant, trespass warning. Then she cross-checked them against body cam logs, dispatch notes, and citizen complaints. Patterns showed up fast. The language in multiple reports matched the same structure: vague accusation, quick escalation, and a clean story on paper. In several incidents, the body cam either contradicted the tone of the report or showed situations that never rose to the level claimed. A couple of prior complaints that had gone nowhere suddenly looked different with this new context. That's when the investigation expanded beyond Klein as a person and into the department's supervision. Desai interviewed Hank Wallace, server Rosa Medina, and a handful of customers who were in the diner that day. Their statements lined up with the video. The Carters were calm, there was no disturbance, and Klein claimed management wanted them out, even after the owner directly said the opposite. Klein was placed on administrative leave while the review continued. The department initially tried to keep it quiet, but the footage was requested, and the situation didn't stay contained. Public pressure grew because the video didn't leave room for debate. The outcome hid in layers. First came discipline for conduct and misuse of authority. Then the bigger one, truthfulness. Once an officer is found to have written reports that don't match recorded evidence, the department has a long-term problem because every past and future case tied to that officer becomes vulnerable. Klein ultimately lost his position. The department also moved to flag his credibility in related proceedings, and the case was referred for further review of any incidents where his reporting was central. For the Carters, the legal side moved with leverage because the evidence was clean. Nia Brooks, the attorney they retained, built the case around three things: the forced removal attempt without cause, the trespass threat used as pressure, and the contradiction between what Klein wrote and what the camera showed. The city settled rather than fight a case that would keep the footage in the spotlight. The settlement was large enough to matter, and it included attorney fees. It also included policy changes that the city agreed to in writing. The reforms weren't just training, they were structural. Clearer standards for disturbance calls and what actually qualifies for removal. Limits on using trespass threats without a verified request from the property owner, authorized manager. Supervisor review when an officer orders removal from a business, absent a clear crime. Stronger body cam compliance and auditing, with penalties for misleading reports that contradict video. Early warning tracking for repeat complaint patterns tied to the same officer months later. The diner looked the same, but the community didn't. Hank kept the same rules for everyone and became the kind of business owner people remembered when they talked about who stood up when it counted. The Carters didn't win because they were loud. They won because they stayed controlled, documented everything, and didn't let the moment get rewritten later. And at the end of it, their kids saw something important. Not that authority is always fair, but that unfair authority can be challenged when the truth is recorded and people don't back down. If you want more stories like this, where dignity, evidence, and accountability actually change outcomes, drop your thoughts in the comments, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe for the next one.
My hands are visible. I'm Sheriff's Deputy Derek Vaughn. This is a county unit.
Yeah? Then you won't mind stepping out.
Run the plate, verify the assignment, that resolves it. You're escalating before you verified anything.
This is the moment the stop stopped being a stop. 2 patrol units had a black man on the shoulder in a county-issued Chevy Tahoe, traffic flying past, and the officers were already in full control mode. Rapid commands, hands hovering near holsters, and zero clear explanation for why he'd been pulled over in the first place. He kept his hands visible and stayed still, but they acted like he was lying from the start. And while they were treating him like a suspect, cars were slowing down and people were lifting phones. Quick pause. Where are you watching from? What state or country? And if you watch stories where cameras and procedure expose bad policing in real time, hit like and subscribe, because this one turns into a public accountability moment on the side of the highway. Now rewind, because this didn't start with a crime. It started with assumptions. It was Fulton County, normal highway traffic, nothing unusual. Deputy Derek Vaughn was driving a county-issued Chevy Tahoe the way thousands of county employees drive every day. Steady speed, no reckless moves, no trying to hide. The Tahoe looked official if you knew what to look for, but it wasn't a marked patrol car, and from a distance it could just look like another SUV. Officers Evan Kessler and Noah Price spotted it, saw Vaughn behind the wheel, and instead of doing the basic steps first, running plates, confirming the vehicle assignment, checking the county tag status, they jumped straight to a conclusion. That's the first power move in stops like this. Act like you already know. So the person has to prove they're innocent, while you pretend you're figuring it out. They lit him up on the highway. Vaughn signaled, pulled over clean, and stopped on the shoulder like he'd been trained to do. He didn't jump out. He didn't reach around. He sat still with his hands visible, waiting for the approach. The officers approached fast and sharp. Their body language said they were expecting a fight. They positioned themselves to control angles and visibility, like this was a felony stop instead of a routine traffic contact. Their hands stayed close to their holsters, and their voices came out clipped and escalated right away. Vaughn did exactly what people are told to do, and what law enforcement training demands. He stayed calm, he kept his hands where they could be seen, and he repeatedly identified himself as a sheriff's deputy driving a county unit. But the officers didn't accept it. They treated his identity statement like part of a story a suspect would tell. They kept pushing commands instead of verifying information. They demanded compliance first and answers later, and the stop moved from pull over to control and detain without any clear explanation being given. That's when civilians started paying attention. Drivers slowed as they passed. One car lingered long enough for someone inside to start recording. Another person on the shoulder further back lifted a phone and held it steady. People do that now automatically, because they've learned footage is the difference between he said, she said, and a policy violation. Vaughn stayed disciplined. He didn't argue emotionally. He didn't make sudden movements. He kept repeating the same key facts. Who he was, that the vehicle was county issued, and that verification would resolve it. The officers didn't pivot. They escalated anyway. The officers didn't slow anything down. They treated the shoulder like their stage and Vaughn like a problem they needed to control. They gave him rapid instructions through a raised voice and tight posture, the kind that makes a normal person sound confused on camera even when they're trying to comply. Vaughn stayed measured. He kept his hands visible and moved only when told. He kept repeating his identity and the fact that Tahoe was county issued. Kessler and Price ignored that and moved straight into detention. They had him step out in a way that wasn't about safety as much as dominance. They positioned him where they wanted, controlled his angle to their cameras, and kept their hands close to their holsters, as if they were waiting for a reason to justify the level they'd already chosen. This is the part where protocol should have corrected the stop. Because if the stop was really about verifying the vehicle, the first move is simple. Run the plate, confirm registration, confirm assignment, then either release or document. But they didn't do that first. They went hands-on first. Vaughn stayed calm anyway. He didn't start challenging them with attitude. He didn't start explaining his whole life. He kept it narrow. He stated who he was, said he worked for the sheriff's office, and said the vehicle would check out. He also kept his body language clean, no sudden turns, no reaching, no talking with his hands. But the officers acted like calm was a trick. They treated his calm like he was too confident. They treated his identity statement like it was too convenient. And because they hadn't verified anything, they were now locked into their own assumptions. Backing off would mean admitting they lit him up without doing basic checks. Traffic kept moving, but more people were slowing down. One bystander pulled onto the shoulder further back and started recording steadily. Another person in a passing car held a phone up as they rolled by. The cameras were now part of the scene, and Kessler and Price knew it. You could tell because they started performing for their own body cams too, using official language and repeating commands, like repetition could replace legal justification. Then came the next escalation. The vehicle. Instead of treating the Tahoe like a county asset that could be verified in seconds, they started treating it like something they could search. They moved towards the doors in the rear area like they were looking for a reason to make this stop make sense. Vaughn continued stating his identity and the county status of the SUV, but the officers didn't pivot into verification. They pivoted into control. And now, you had the most dangerous combination on the side of a highway. No clear explanation for the stop. A detention that happened before verification. And officers starting to treat a normal vehicle like it contained evidence. That's how unlawful searches happen in real life. Not with one big dramatic decision, with a series of small choices that all lean the same direction. The officers moved from detaining Vaughn to treating the Tahoe like it was theirs to go through. They started at the driver area first, quick checks that looked like they were trying to find something that justified how hard they came in. Then they moved toward the back, opening compartments and scanning like they expected contraband, not county property. Vaughn stayed controlled on the shoulder the whole time. He kept his hands visible, didn't jerk around, didn't try to help, and didn't give them any movement they could twist into a threat. He kept stating the same facts. He was Sheriff's Deputy Derek Vaughn. The Tahoe was county-issued, and verification would clear it. Kessler and Price still didn't pivot into verification. They kept acting like the search would produce the answer they wanted, and the bystanders caught it. At least 2 civilians were recording clearly now. Phones held steady, capturing the officers moving through the SUV while Vaughn remained detained. That mattered because Bodycam can miss details, angles, distance, what's happening at the vehicle while the detained person is off frame. Civilian video fills the gaps. Then the search produced the one thing the officers couldn't argue with: sheriff-issued gear and paperwork. They pulled up items that weren't random personal stuff. It was official equipment and documents that belonged with a county unit. The kind of proof that makes it obvious the driver didn't take the vehicle. He was assigned to it. You could see the shift start, but it wasn't clean. Instead of immediately stopping, apologizing, and switching to verification, the officers tried to salvage it. They moved slower. They started handling the paperwork like they were checking, but the problem was already on video. They were searching first and verifying later. And this is where their earlier choices boxed them in. If they admitted they didn't run plates, it looked reckless. If they claimed they had cause, the footage didn't support it. If they pretended this was routine, the intensity of the detention didn't match routine. So they hovered in that awkward middle ground, still acting like Vaughn was questionable, while holding proof that he wasn't. Vaughn stayed calm anyway. He didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He kept it factual and waited, because he knew the longer this went on, the more evidence got created. Then the scene changed again. A supervisor vehicle arrived, and the person who stepped out wasn't there to back the officers up. Chief Inspector Helena Ward arrived with the posture of someone who had already been briefed and was coming to end a mess. Ward walked up, looked at Vaughn, and recognized him immediately. That recognition mattered because it cut through all the games. She didn't need a story. She didn't need a hunch. She knew who he was. And right there on the shoulder, with body cams running and civilians recording, Ward confronted the real issue. The officers had failed to run plates or verify identity before escalating to a hands-on detention and a search. Ward didn't treat it like a misunderstanding. She treated it like misconduct. She separated the officers from Vaughn, controlled the scene, and made a call that shifted the whole balance. She called internal affairs to respond to the stop itself, in real time, while evidence was fresh and cameras were rolling. Then she did something that almost never happens in front of civilians. She detained both officers on the scene pending an immediate inquiry. Not arrested like criminals, but restricted, separated, and treated as subjects of an active misconduct review. That's what it looks like when a supervisor knows the department is about to get embarrassed and chooses accountability over damage control. Internal affairs didn't roll up like this was routine. They arrived like they already understood the risk. 2 officers had escalated a stop on a highway, searched a county SUV, and the whole thing was on multiple cameras. Chief Inspector Helena Ward kept control of the scene from the moment IA showed up. She didn't let Kessler and Price regroup and sync their story. She kept them separated, restricted their movement, and made it clear they were no longer running anything. Ward then had Vaughn moved away from the shoulder and out of the line of traffic, not as a suspect, but as the person who had been put through a baseless escalation. She checked his condition, made sure he was steady, and confirmed his identity, the way the original officers should have done in the first minute. IEA started collecting facts immediately. They documented the stop-start time, the reason recorded by the patrol unit, and what was said on camera about why Vaughn was pulled over. They also documented what didn't happen. No plate verification before the detention, no clear articulated reason for the level of force posture, and no clean legal explanation for the search. Then IA did the part departments hate, but oversight requires. They locked down the evidence. Body cams were identified and flagged for preservation. Dash footage was requested. Radio traffic and CAD logs were pulled. Ward requested the bystander videos on scene, because civilian footage often shows what body cams don't, where hands went when doors opened, what was searched, and how long it lasted. The bystanders were still there. Some had stayed on purpose. They knew what they'd seen, and they knew what usually happens when nobody records. A few drivers had already uploaded short clips. Others were texting them to friends. By the time IA finished the initial on-scene steps, the situation wasn't just a stop anymore. It was a public incident with a growing digital footprint. Kessler and Price tried to reframe it as caution. Their body language showed they wanted to get back into officer explains, public accepts mode. But the facts weren't cooperating. Because if the concern was the Tahoe, the easiest solution was running the plate and confirming the assignment. That didn't happen first. What happened first was assumption, then pressure, then detention, then a search. Ward made sure that point was clearly captured in the reporting. She also made sure a supervisor-level directive was issued on the spot. Both officers were removed from patrol pending investigation, not later, not after a meeting. Right then, IA opened a formal misconduct case before the scene even fully cleared. That mattered because it prevented the usual delay tactics. It set deadlines. It triggered mandatory reporting steps. It also meant the officers' statements would be taken under an investigative framework, not as casual explanations. By the end of the night, the department leadership already knew what was coming next. The video was spreading, and it had an obvious storyline. A black deputy in a county vehicle got treated like a suspect, detained aggressively, and searched. until official gear proved he was telling the truth. Over the next couple of days, the department started taking heat from every direction. Community members were asking why the stop escalated at all. Local officials wanted to know how 2 officers skipped basic verification. Civil rights complaints were being discussed publicly because an unlawful detention and search on camera is not something a department can explain away with training issues. And inside the department, the bigger problem became clear. This wasn't just embarrassing, it was liability. A stop like that creates exposure for policy violations and potential civil rights consequences, especially when it looks like the escalation was driven by assumptions instead of facts. Internal Affairs didn't treat it like a minor complaint. They treated it like a stop that created legal exposure on camera. They pulled the full timeline: when the lights came on, what reason was logged, what was said on Bodycam, and what steps were skipped. Then they compared it to policy, especially the parts about detentions, searches, and verification procedures. The biggest issue was simple and hard to defend. Kessler and Price escalated before they verified anything. They didn't properly run plates before going hands-on. They didn't take Vaughn's identity claim and do the basic confirmation steps. They detained him like he was a threat without articulating a clear reason that matched what the cameras showed. They searched the Tahoe and only discovered the truth after they were already inside the vehicle. That sequence matters because departments can argue intent all day, but footage shows process, and their process was backwards. IA interviewed Vaughn first, then took separate statements from Kessler and Price so they couldn't align stories. They also requested any prior stops tied to those officers that looked similar: fast escalation, vague reasoning, and searches that didn't match the original stop purpose. When the initial findings hit command staff, consequences landed quickly. Both officers were suspended pending final disposition, removed from patrol duties, and restricted from proactive stops. The department also flagged the incident for a civil rights review because a detention and search without clear, lawful justification is exactly the kind of case that turns into a federal complaint if the facts support it. And the public part didn't help them either. Civilian recordings filled in gaps and made it harder to claim camera angle issues. The bystander videos showed the search activity clearly and showed Vaughn staying controlled the entire time. That erased the common excuse that the stop escalated because the driver was acting unpredictable. Chief Inspector Ward's on-scene actions became part of the outcome, too. Her decision to call IA to the scene, preserve evidence immediately, and restrict the officers before they could reset the narrative made it clear the department couldn't pretend it was nothing. It also signaled to the public that someone in authority was willing to call it what it was: a stop driven by assumptions, not verification. The department tried to quiet it down at first, but the footage didn't let them. By the end of that week, the videos were everywhere locally. People weren't arguing over opinions. They were pointing at the same sequence. 2 officers skipped verification, escalated fast, detained a black deputy driving a county vehicle, searched the SUV, and only then found out he was telling the truth. Command staff held a formal review and locked in the final findings. The department documented policy failures around stop justification, escalation standards, and search procedures. The civil rights angle stayed on the table because the key question wasn't just, was it sloppy? It was, why did they assume criminality without checking the most basic information first? Kessler and Price didn't get protected by vague wording because there were too many recordings. Their suspensions were upheld and extended, and the case was referred for further review on whether the stop and search crossed legal lines, not just departmental ones. Then the department had to do damage control the only way that actually works: changes that are measurable. They updated stop protocols, so plate checks and vehicle verification had to be documented before escalation when the situation allowed it. Supervisors were required to review certain categories of stops automatically, especially stops involving detention and vehicle searches. And they expanded body cam and dash cam audits to catch patterns early instead of waiting for a viral incident to force action. Vaughn didn't become the face of it publicly. He didn't have to. The footage did that job. What he did get was something most people never get after a stop like that: a documented record that confirmed he was the one treated wrongly and that it wasn't acceptable. And that's the real ending here. Two officers tried to run a highway stop on assumptions, but cameras and oversight turned it into a public accountability moment. Now tell me this: if you were driving that Tahoe and you knew you were legit, would you stay calm like Vaughn did, or would you think you'd have to argue to survive the stop? Drop your answer in the comments, share this with someone who needs to see how fast assumption policing escalates, and subscribe for more stories where real accountability actually happens.